I was in that familiar whirlwind, throwing Emma's favorite stuffed elephant into her overnight bag, double-checking I'd packed enough diapers, frantically searching for her tiny socks that always seemed to disappear. My heart was pounding against my ribs, that cocktail of stress and hope making my hands shake slightly. "Morgan, we need to go now. Traffic's already backing up on the highway." Mike's voice floated in from the hallway, that gentle but urgent tone he uses when I'm cutting it too close. "Just one more minute," I called back, zipping the bag and grabbing my presentation folder. This meeting was make or break for me. 6 months of research, strategy development, and sleepless nights had led to this moment. If I nailed this presentation, I'd be the youngest director in the company's history. If I bombed it, well, I couldn't afford to think about that. I glanced at my phone, another text from my mother. "We're waiting, Morgan. Family always comes first." That phrase, always that phrase. "Ready?" Mike stood in the doorway, car keys dangling from his fingers, eyebrows raised in that way that said we should have left 10 minutes ago. The drive to my parents' suburban home was silent except for Emma's occasional babble from the back seat. I kept rehearsing my presentation points in my head while trying to squash that familiar knot of anxiety that formed whenever I had to ask my parents for help. "It'll be fine," Mike said, reaching over to squeeze my knee. "They agreed, right?" "They said yes," I replied, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured lawns we passed. But with my mother, yes can mean a lot of things. I wasn't wrong. When we pulled into their circular driveway, I noticed my sister Vanessa's SUV parked near the garage. Strange. She hadn't mentioned she'd be here today. My mother opened the front door before we even reached it. Her smile froze when she saw Emma's overnight bag in my hand. "Morgan," she said, her voice dropping several degrees. "What is this?" I blinked, confusion washing over me. "Emma's things, for tonight." Her mouth formed a thin line. "Morgan, we are not your babysitters. We already raised our kids." The words hit me like a physical blow. Behind her, I could hear children laughing. "But you said..." "I said we'd see you today. I didn't agree to watch Emma." Something inside me snapped. I pushed past her, ignoring her protests, and walked into the living room where I found my father on the floor, building a Lego castle with Vanessa's twin boys. Vanessa herself was sprawled across the leather sectional I'd recognized from a high-end furniture store I couldn't afford to shop at, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up. "Oh, hey, Morgan." "What's going on?" I managed to ask, though I already knew. "Mom and Dad are watching the boys tonight," she said casually, turning back to her phone. "I've got the worst migraine and needed some me time." "But I have my presentation." "That work thing." My mother appeared behind me. "Morgan, surely you can reschedule. Vanessa is really suffering today." Vanessa, who hadn't put her phone down or shown a single sign of discomfort, gave a weak smile. "It's killing me." I stood there, frozen, as the truth I'd been avoiding for years crystallized with painful clarity. The monthly, from my account to theirs. The emergencies that always seemed to coincide with my payday. The guilt trips when I hesitated even slightly. Mike stepped forward and placed his hand on the small of my back. Our signal, developed over years of these family gut punches. "We need to go," he said quietly. I looked at my father, still playing with my nephews, deliberately avoiding my eyes. I looked at Vanessa, who had the audacity to look annoyed at the interruption. I looked at my mother, whose expression held no remorse, only the expectation that I would, as always, fall in line. "I understand now," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I've never been your daughter, I've just been your ATM." My mother's face hardened. "That's ridiculous, after everything we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me?" The words tasted strange in my mouth. I'd never spoken to them this way before. "Besides taking my money for the past 6 years, I pay your rent, your utilities, your car insurance. I bought that couch Vanessa is lying on." Vanessa sat up now, suddenly interested. "Morgan, you're being dramatic. Family helps family." Funny how that help only flows in one direction. My father finally looked up. Now, Morgan. We're leaving, I said, cutting him off. And I think it's time I stop funding everyone's lives but my own. My mother's expression shifted from hardness to calculation. You don't mean that. You're just upset. Yes, I am upset, but I also mean every word. The drive home happened in weighted silence. Mike didn't push me to talk, just held my hand across the console while I stared out the window. Emma had fallen asleep in her car seat, oblivious to the family earthquake that had just occurred. I felt hollow, gutted, but beneath that hollowness something else was taking root, something like steel. At 2 a.m., with Emma finally asleep and Mike's gentle snores coming from our bedroom, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. The blue light illuminated my face as I opened my banking app. Emma's baby monitor sat next to me, her soft breathing a reminder of why I needed to do this. First, I navigated to the automatic payments section. My fingers hovered over the trackpad for just a second before I canceled my parents' rent payment. Then the utilities, electric, water, internet. Then their cell phone plan, their car insurance. Each cancellation felt like cutting a cord that had been wrapped around my chest for years, making it a little easier to breathe. I opened a spreadsheet and began documenting every payment I'd made to them over the past 6 years. The total made me physically ill. $115,843. $100 and $15,843. Money that could have gone to Emma's college fund. A down payment on a house. Hell, even just a vacation for my own little family, who I'd been shortchanging to support people who saw my generosity as an obligation. When I finally closed my laptop, dawn was breaking. I felt lighter than I had in years, despite not having slept. It started at 6:37 a.m. My phone lit up with notifications. Mom, Morgan, there's a problem with the rent payment. Mom, call me immediately. Dad, your mother is very upset. What's going on with the payments? Vanessa, WTF Morgan. Mom says you're cutting them off. By noon, my voicemail was full. The tone of the messages shifted from confusion to disbelief to anger. I blocked their numbers, but texts started coming from unknown phones as they borrowed from friends, trying to circumvent my blockade. I expected to feel guilty or anxious. Instead, I felt strangely calm, like I'd been swimming against a current for years and had finally stopped fighting it. That evening, while feeding Emma her dinner, I checked Facebook. My mother had made a post. Heartbroken today. After decades of sacrifice for our children, being abandoned in our time of need is a pain no parent should experience. Family is supposed to be forever. 67 comments of support followed. People who'd known me my entire life, offering my mother sympathy, calling me selfish, ungrateful. Vanessa had commented, "She's always been like this, putting herself before family. So disappointing." I should have been devastated. Instead, I felt a cold clarity washing over me. "What are you going to do?" Mike asked, watching my face as I scrolled through the comments. "I'm going to tell the truth." I spent the next few hours assembling evidence. Screenshots of bank transfers, text messages where they demanded money, photos of items I'd paid for in their home. The spreadsheet with the grand total. Mike looked over my shoulder as I prepared my post. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I met his eyes. They don't get to rewrite history, not anymore. I hit post and closed my laptop. The tsunami of notifications began almost immediately. People who had commented supportively on my mother's post were now sending me private messages of shock. Former family friends expressed disbelief at the hypocrisy. Several of my mother's closest friends reached out to tell me they'd had no idea and were appalled at how I'd been treated. Most surprising were the messages from people sharing similar stories. My parents did the same thing to me for 8 years until I finally cut them off. I thought I was the only one whose family treated them like a personal bank. Thank you for speaking up. I've been afraid to stand up to my sister, who's been financially draining me for years. I hadn't expected to become some kind of spokesperson for financial family abuse, but each message made me feel less alone, more certain I'd done the right thing. Of course, my family escalated. My mother left a voicemail from her friend's phone. Your father's blood pressure is dangerously high because of what you've done. If anything happens to him, that's on you, Morgan. 2 days later, my parents and Vanessa showed up at my office. I watched through the glass walls of our conference room as they made a scene in the lobby, my mother crying dramatically, my father looking stern, Vanessa gesturing wildly to the receptionist. Security eventually escorted them out. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Ellie. Vanessa's telling everyone you're having some kind of mental breakdown. Just wanted to let you know. The next day, my aunt called. Morgan, sweetheart, I know family can be difficult, but you need to make peace with your parents. They won't be here forever, you know. Through it all, I remained steady. Each manipulation tactic only reinforced my decision. A week after I'd cut them off financially, Mike and I sat at our kitchen table with a bottle of wine, our budget spreadsheet open on the laptop between us. So, Mike said, pouring me another glass, what should we do with an extra $1,600 a month? It was such a simple question, but it hit me like a thunderbolt. What could we do with our own money? We could finally take that weekend in the mountains, I suggested, the possibility feeling almost illicit. We could look at that daycare for Emma, the one with the art program. I nodded, feeling something unfamiliar, hope maybe. We could start her college fund. Mike reached across the table and took my hand. This is what normal families do, Morgan. They use their money for their own families. The next day, I opened a college savings account for Emma and made the first deposit, $1,600. The community response was mixed. Mrs. Hargrove from church brought over a casserole, her concern so manufactured I could practically see the warranty sticker. We're all so worried about you, she said, eyes gleaming with the excitement of being close to fresh drama. I'm fine, I told her. Better than ever, actually. I got the promotion at work. Her eyebrows shot up. That didn't fit the narrative she'd been fed. 2 weeks after I'd cut them off, my parents held a garage sale. A cousin sent me photos. The Italian leather sectional, my mother's designer handbags, the 85-inch TV I'd bought them last Christmas, all being sold off to make rent. A month later, I heard through the grapevine that my parents, both in their early 50s and fully capable, had found jobs. My father at a hardware store, my mother as a receptionist. Vanessa had moved back in with her ex to share expenses. It was amazing how quickly they'd figured out how to support themselves when their ATM suddenly stopped working. The guilt you're feeling wasn't accidental, Dr. Taylor said during our session. It was installed intentionally, like software. Your family programmed you to feel responsible for their financial well-being. I'd started therapy 3 weeks after cutting my family off. The freedom I felt was real, but so was the guilt that still ambushed me at unexpected moments. What they did to you has a name, she continued. Financial abuse, and you're not alone. I keep wondering if I did the right thing, I admitted, cutting them off completely. Did you ever try setting smaller boundaries before? I laughed, the sound hollow. Every time I tried, there was a new emergency, a new reason I was being selfish if I didn't help. Dr. Taylor nodded. Sometimes a clean break is the only way to break the cycle. After that session, I deactivated my social media accounts. The silence felt sacred. No more angry messages, no more flying monkeys sent by my family to make me feel guilty, no more public performance of family drama. That evening, I sat on the floor with Emma, watching her build a tower with her blocks. It kept falling, but she didn't get frustrated. She just rebuilt it each time, starting with a wider, stronger base. Smart kid, smarter than her mother had been anyway. 3 months after I'd cut contact, a letter arrived. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. The envelope sat on our kitchen counter for 3 days before Mike finally said, "You don't have to open it. It's your choice." I stared at it for a long moment, then slid it open. The content surprised me. No guilt trips, no accusations, no demands. Instead, an apology, one that sounded genuine, with no manipulative undertones I could detect. She acknowledged taking advantage of me, admitted that she and my father had become dependent on my support in an unhealthy way, and expressed remorse for the pain they'd caused. "I'd like to talk," she wrote at the end. "On your terms when and if you're ready." I considered ignoring it, but after discussing it with Dr. Taylor, I decided to respond with clear boundaries, a public meeting with a set time limit. The Coastal Cafe was busy when I arrived, 15 minutes early to choose my seat strategically, corner table, back to the wall, clear view of the entrance. I ordered my coffee and waited, part of me still expecting this to be some elaborate setup. When my mother walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the highlighted hair, the designer purse, the carefully curated appearance of middle-class success. Her hair was its natural gray now, her clothes simple but neat. She looked authentic. She spotted me and hesitated before approaching, as if afraid I might bolt. When she reached the table, she didn't try to hug me, just asked, "May I sit down?" I gestured to the chair across from me. "This is a conversation," I said immediately, "not a reconciliation." She nodded, placing her hands flat on the table. "I understand." For the next 45 minutes, we talked. Really talked, maybe for the first time in our lives. She explained how she and my father had fallen into financial dependency, how the temporary help I'd offered years ago had gradually become their plan for retirement, how Vanessa had learned to work the same system. "It was wrong," she said simply. "I confused love with what I could get from you, and I'm sorry." "I love you," I told her, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I just didn't know how to love you properly, and you didn't know how to love me." Before we parted, I laid out my terms: no financial support ever again. Mike and Emma as my primary family who would always come first. Family therapy required before any regular contact could resume, and a public acknowledgement of the years of financial exploitation. "You need to make this right with more than just me," I said. "You need to tell the truth to everyone you lied to about me." She agreed to everything, without argument. It was the first time I could remember my mother accepting my terms without negotiation, manipulation, or tears. As she left, she turned back. "Thank you for meeting with me. I know you didn't have to." "No," I agreed. "I didn't." 1 year later, Mike and I stood in the living room of our new house, our names proudly on the deed. Emma ran from room to room, exploring her new kingdom, squealing with delight when she discovered the backyard. The wall of our living room held nothing but photos of people who genuinely loved us. Mike's parents who always respected our boundaries, my college roommate who'd stood by me through everything, a few chosen friends who had become our found family. Emma was learning things at 3 that I hadn't learned until 30. Healthy boundaries, true respect, the difference between generosity and exploitation. "You say thank you when someone shares," she told her stuffed animals during their tea party. "And you don't take things that aren't yours." Smart kid. My promotion to marketing director had come through, bringing not just a better salary, but also an unexpected platform. I'd started leading workshops called From Family Bank to Financial Freedom, helping others recognize and escape financial abuse. "It's amazing what you can achieve when you're not paying for 3 extra adults," I told my support group. My father had chosen estrangement rather than respect. He couldn't accept the new terms, couldn't face the reality of what they'd done. It hurt, but I understood. Some people would rather lose a relationship than admit they were wrong. Vanessa called occasionally now. Our conversations were cautious but less hostile. She'd been forced to stand on her own feet too, and the experience had changed her. "I never realized how much you were carrying all of us," she admitted during one call. My mother worked as an office administrator now, living in a small apartment within her means. She visited Emma once a month, supervised visits with strict boundaries. She'd fulfilled her end of the bargain, publishing a heartfelt apology on social media and correcting anyone who tried to spin the old narrative. She'd brought Emma a present on her last visit, a building block set. "I thought she might like to build something," she'd said. "Not an expensive toy designed to impress or manipulate, just a thoughtful gift for a child who loved to create." Progress. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I still marvel at how different my life is now. Emma's college fund grows steadily, ensuring her future won't include the financial anxiety that shadowed mine. Our home is ours, not a rental where we feel temporary. I no longer check my account balance with dread before buying groceries. But the biggest change isn't financial. It's the knowledge I've gained. My worth was never in what I could give, but in who I am. I found purpose in helping others identify and escape the same patterns, breaking cycles of financial abuse that can span generations. Last week, I ran into Mrs. Hargrove at the grocery store. She asked, with poorly disguised curiosity, how things were with my family. Better, I told her truthfully. We all had to learn what family really means. She looked disappointed by my measured response, clearly hopping for juicier details. As I walked away, I smiled to myself. That's the thing about taking back your story. You get to decide how much of it to share and with whom. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike, picked up Emma from daycare. Starting dinner. Love you. Simple, normal hours. I texted back, on my way home. Home, not just a place, but a feeling. The feeling of being exactly where I belong, with exactly the people I choose. It took losing my first family to build my real one, and I wouldn't trade what I have now for anything.